this lecture, we're going to discuss a little bit about EEG hardware systems. So a basic EEG system has at least 4 parts. The first part, or one part, is the stimulus or presentation and response system. This is important because it's the part of the system that delivers what the person is going to respond to. So maybe you're presenting an audio signal or a visual pattern or a question or something to memorize, and that would be your stimulus. So you need a system that presents that stimulus to the volunteer and records their responses. You also have the CAP, or probes, or net. This is the part of the system that actually connects to the body, to the scalp, and has the recording electrodes. Then systems will have an amplifier. Sometimes this is a preamp that does some preconditioning before digitization. Other times the signal is digitized directly, and all of the processing is done on the computer. Sometimes this also contains a wireless transmission system, other times not. It just depends on the system. And then finally, you've got some kind of a recording and post-processing system. Sometimes this also can, there can be another amplifier stage in between where some additional signal conditioning is done before it goes to the computer, or all of that can be done directly in the computer. It just depends on the type of system that you purchase. So going through each one of these components independently, the stimulus presentation system just allows for visual, auditory, or cognitive cues to be presented to the volunteer. It's very important to time synchronize this with the acquisition hardware. So you need some kind of time stamping routine that tells the hardware when the stimulus was presented, and often also when the person responded. So usually the response system is a part of the stimulus presentation system, and this can be like buttons on a response pad. It can even be voice activated, but this is usually linked to the hardware as well. So there's usually some kind of time stamping on the acquisition system that says, yes, this person responded, and they responded at this time. The stimulus presentation system itself is usually a separate computer. So the linkage is done either via a TTL pulse from one system to the other, some kind of hardware connection. Different systems do this in different ways. It's worth noting here that if your system is a Windows-based system and the synchronization is done via Windows-based clock, there is a certain level of uncertainty because of inaccuracies in the Windows-based clock from computer to computer. So if you don't have that hardware-based TTL pulse that's coming in, giving a clear timestamp, you do have to live with some uncertainty, which is usually not a problem. The EEG is a relatively slow signal. The only time that becomes a problem is if you're trying to record some very fast responses, usually auditory to auditory input type signals. There are 2 presentation systems that we have in our lab. One of them is called STEM. It's a Windows-based system. It's used by the Compumedics and Neuroscan people. It has a very, very accurate hardware trigger, so the jitter is very low, and it can record very, very fast responses. There are some audio, visual, and standard neuropsychological tests that are built into STEM, checkerboard, card sorting, things like that, that you can run without a lot of user input, or you can design your own. EEGhprime is probably the most well-known stimulus system. It's also Windows-based. It won't run on the Mac at all. It's a visual programming environment. the advantage of EEPrime is there are a lot of user support communities. It's easy to modify, so there's a lot of code that's already out there and you can modify for your own purposes. It records behavioral data. The disadvantage is it does not have a hardware trigger, it's a software trigger, and so you do have some kind of built-in inaccuracies there. And then there are user design systems, and so people in fact have used MATLAB to design their own systems for the presentation of stimuli, and some of these are shareware and open source that you can find on the internet, and people have also used LabVIEW. So there are just any number of ways to design a presentation system. EEPrime is probably the most popular one. It is also used, for example, with the fMRI. So if you're doing either simultaneous or combination studies with EEG and fMRI, EEPrime is probably the way to go. Now the electrodes, there are a number of different options, but there are basically two types, gel electrode and solution electrode. So you see up here at the top right, these are electrodes that would use a gel-based system. You see there's a little hole here in the middle. That's filled with gel, and it's actually the gel that makes contact with the head. The other type is a solution-based system. I don't know if you can detect that in the middle here there's a little sponge. That sponge is soaked in a saline solution. The saline solution is what makes contact with the scalp. Most clinical, if you go to the neurologist and you have an EEG done, they'll typically use these single gel electrodes because an experienced technician is just going to put those in place. In a research lab, you're more likely to have an electrode cap. That helps a little bit with the consistency of where the electrodes are, and then it has fixed location where the gel goes. With the saline electrodes, an electrode net or even something that looks a lot like a headset can be used. The nets have a certain electrode placement that allows them to minimize stresses. The electrode headsets tend to allow you to move more. Some of them even have a motion sensor that monitors movement so that can be subtracted out as an artifact. If indeed it's present, it's a little easier to make those wireless, but they tend to have far fewer electrodes because it's wireless and portable, you're going to run into some bandwidth problems if you're trying to both get good temporal resolution and transmit a wireless signal. The amplifiers, some systems use a pre-stage amp that's got some little RC low-pass filters before they digitize so that you can get rid of noise. Other systems digitize right there at the headset or cap location and use only software amplifiers. Some systems use a wireless transmission. You've got a headset. Sometimes that's Bluetooth. Just a lot of different kinds of systems out there available. One interesting website, I'll just list it here. We won't really talk in detail about probes or about do-it-yourself systems, but there's a really fun open source group called OpenEEG. They have a website here, and this is a number of people who have built their own EEG, and so it's kind of fun to go and look at what they've done and look at some of their systems, and they have very detailed directions on how to build your own EEG, including PCB boards that you can either buy from them or they have design plans to make them yourself. So that might be fun for some of you who are more hardware oriented to go and look at that site.